The first time the HOA president told me my solar panels were illegal, she was standing at the end of my driveway with a clipboard in one hand and two county deputies behind her. She pointed toward the roof of my house like she was pointing at evidence in a murder case. "Those panels come down today," she said. I looked past her at the 12 black solar panels shining in the morning sun. Then I looked at the two deputies, then back at her. "No," I said. Her expression changed. "You don't understand," she replied. "The board has already voted." I almost laughed, because 3 months earlier, that same board had sent me a letter congratulating me for installing what they called an energy conscious improvement. And now they were threatening to arrest me over it. What none of them knew was that I had spent the previous 6 months preparing for exactly this kind of fight. And when the Texas power grid finally failed 2 weeks later, my house became the only house in the entire neighborhood with electricity. That was the moment the HOA realized they had made a terrible mistake. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old and I live on a 12-acre property outside a growing Texas community called Red Creek Estates. It wasn't the kind of place I had imagined living in when I was younger. There were no manicured city streets or fancy restaurants around the corner. Just a long gravel road, wooden fences, cattle pastures, scattered ranch homes, and an old red barn sitting behind my house. My property had belonged to my grandfather before me. The house itself was a single-story farmhouse with faded white siding, a wide front porch, and a metal roof that had survived more storms than I could count. Behind it were my barn, a small workshop, a water well, and enough pasture for the few cattle I kept. My closest neighbor was roughly half a mile away, at least that was how things used to be. Then Red Creek Estates expanded. Developers began buying parcels around us. Suddenly, enormous houses appeared where there had once been open fields. Stone entry monuments went up, streetlights appeared, and eventually, a large wooden sign announced the arrival of the Red Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I wasn't technically inside their original subdivision. My grandfather's deed predated the development by decades. But the HOA insisted that my property was subject to certain neighborhood restrictions because part of my access road connected to their private road system. I disagreed. They disagreed louder. For years, we mostly ignored each other. Then I installed the solar panels. I'd been thinking about solar for years. Power outages had become more frequent, and every time the electricity went down, my well pump stopped, my refrigerator shut off, and the electric gate at the barn became useless. I didn't want to depend completely on the grid anymore. So I hired a licensed solar contractor, obtained the required county permits, and installed 12 high-efficiency panels on the south-facing section of my roof. The system wasn't huge, it wasn't some futuristic power station. It was designed to keep my house, well pump, refrigerator, security system, and essential equipment running. I also installed a battery storage system inside my workshop. Everything was inspected. Everything passed. The county signed off on it. And for about 3 months, nobody complained. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Monday afternoon. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I saw a white SUV pull onto my gravel driveway. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 50s, perfectly dressed, carrying a leather folder. I recognized her immediately. Victoria Hale, president of the Red Creek Estates OA. She walked toward me without smiling. "Mr. Carter, you know who I am?" Her smile appeared, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to discuss your roof." I looked at the roof. It's still there. Her jaw tightened. "Your solar installation violates the architectural standards of Red Creek Estates." I stood up. "My property isn't part of your architectural standards. That is not what our records show." "Then your records are wrong." She opened her folder and handed me a printed notice. At the top were the words "Farmville Duo and Noti." I read it twice. Then I looked at her. "You approve this?" Victoria's smile disappeared. "I approved nothing. You sent me an approval letter." "That was preliminary. The county approved it." "We aren't the county." "No," I said. "You're the OA." She stared at me. "You have 30 days to remove the panels." I folded the letter. "I'm not removing them." She stepped closer. "Mr. Carter, I strongly suggest you reconsider." I smiled. "I strongly suggest you rid my deed." Her eyes narrowed. Then she turned around and walked back to her SUV. Before getting inside, she stopped. "You're going to regret making this difficult." I watched her drive away. At the time, I thought it was just another HOA power trip. I was wrong. 3 days later, someone entered my property at night. My security camera caught a black pickup stopping near the fence. 2 men got out. They walked toward the solar equipment. One of them carried a flashlight. The other carried something long in his hand. They never reached the panels. My motion lights came on. They immediately ran back to the truck and drove away. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy arrived 20 minutes later. He reviewed the footage and wrote down the vehicle description. "Recognize them?" he asked. "No." He looked toward the solar panels. "Anybody giving you trouble?" I hesitated. "There's an HOA dispute." He raised an eyebrow. "Over solar panels?" "Apparently." He shook his head. "Keep the cameras running." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The following morning, I found a red warning sticker attached to my front gate. "You know du charge des truc removm and DATLY." There was no signature, no official county seal, just the HOA logo. I called Victoria. She answered on the second ring. "You're trespassing on my property," I said. "No one from the HOA entered your property." "Then how did your notice get on my gate?" Silence. "Victoria, we have enforcement contractors. Did you send them?" "That isn't your concern. It becomes my concern when they enter my land. She lowered her voice. Daniel, you're making a serious mistake. I looked toward the solar panels. What exactly are you afraid of? She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that I would remember for a very long time. Those panels aren't your biggest problem. Then she hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her words, not because they sounded threatening, because they sounded scared. The next morning, I called the county permitting office myself. I asked them to confirm that my solar installation was legal. The clerk searched the system. Mr. Carter, your permits are valid. Any complaints? There was a pause. One complaint was filed. Behu, I can't give you personal information over the phone. Was it the HOA? Another pause.
Yes.
What did they claim? She sounded confused. They claim your solar system is connected to an unauthorized private electrical network. I stared at the wall. That's impossible. I know. What does the county say? Your inspection passed. I thanked her and hung up. Then I noticed something outside. A black SUV was parked on the road. It stayed there for almost 20 minutes. Nobody got out. Then it slowly drove away. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Mark Reynolds. He listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he asked one question. Daniel, did you keep every document, every email, every letter?
Yes.
Inspection reports?
Yes.
OA approval? Yes. He exhaled. Good. Why? Because I think they just gave you the beginning of a very interesting case. 2 days later, Victoria called an emergency OA meeting. I wasn't invited, but one of my neighbors was. His name was Tom Bradley. He had lived across the road from the subdivision for nearly 20 years. That evening, he came to my porch looking nervous. You need to see this. He handed me his phone. On the screen was a photograph of the OA meeting agenda. There was only one item listed, emergency resolution removal of Daniel Carter's solar energy system. But underneath it was something else, a paragraph about community electrical safety. Tom looked at me. They're telling everyone your panels could destabilize the neighborhood. I laughed. That's ridiculous. Tom didn't laugh. Daniel? What? They showed us a map. What kind of map? A map of the neighborhood power lines. My smile disappeared. Why would they have that? Tom looked toward the road. I don't know. Then he lowered his voice. But there's something else. What? He swallowed. Your property was marked in red. I stared at him. What does red mean? Tom looked me straight in the eyes. They wouldn't tell us. That night I went into my workshop and pulled out the original deed my grandfather had kept in a fireproof box. I spread the old documents across my workbench. Property lines, easements, utility rights, survey records. And then I saw something I'd never noticed before. A handwritten note on an old county survey. It wasn't about my house. It wasn't about the barn. It wasn't even about the road. It was about something buried underground. A utility easement crossed the northern edge of my property. But according to the date on the document, it had been created nearly 30 years before Red Creek Estates existed. I grabbed my phone and called Mark. He answered immediately.
What's wrong?
I found an easement. What kind? I don't know yet. I sent him a photograph. He was silent for several seconds. Then he said, Daniel, don't call anyone at the HOA. Why? Because if I'm reading this correctly. He stopped. Mark, I think your solar panels may have exposed something they desperately don't want the county to find. I looked through the workshop window toward my house. The panels were still glowing under the moonlight. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't really about solar power. It had never been about solar power. And somewhere beneath my 12 acres of Texas soil was the reason they wanted those panels gone. The next morning, Mark arrived at my property before sunrise. He parked his dark blue Ford F-150 beside my workshop, stepped out in his usual gray suit, and carried a thick leather folder under his arm. Mark Reynolds was 51, tall and lean, with short dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. He had a calm face, brown eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people stop arguing when he entered a room. He walked into my workshop and looked at the documents spread across my workbench. Show me exactly what you found. I pointed toward the survey. This easement. He leaned over it. For almost a minute, he said nothing. Then he pulled out his phone and photographed the page. Where did you get this? My grandfather's files. Has anyone from the HOA ever mentioned it? No. County. No. Utility company. Mark looked at me. That worries me. What is it? An old electrical transmission easement. I figured that much. No, he said. You don't understand. This isn't a normal residential utility easement. He tapped the document. This appears to reserve access for a private distribution line. I frowned. What does that mean? It means somebody may have rights to run electrical infrastructure across your property. But there's nothing underground. Mark looked toward the pasture. You sure? I've lived here most of my life. That doesn't mean there isn't something buried. I stared at him. Why would the HOA care? That's what we're going to find out. He spent the next hour comparing the old survey with modern county records. Then he found something. A parcel number. The easement connected my northern boundary to land now owned by Red Creek Estates. But the strange part was the date. The easement had been recorded in 1987. Red Creek Estates wasn't incorporated until 2011. Mark leaned back. Someone inherited an old right. Ooh. He pointed to a corporate name on the document. Red Creek Utility Cooperative. I recognized the name. That's not the HOA. No. Who owns it? Mark looked at me. That's the problem. He turned his laptop toward me. The corporation had dissolved years ago, but its electrical infrastructure had apparently been transferred to another entity, a company called Red Creek Energy Services. I stared at the screen. Isn't that the company managing the neighborhood's backup power? Mark nodded.
Exactly.
Suddenly, Victoria's behavior made more sense. The HOA wasn't afraid of my solar panels. They were afraid I would discover what the panels were connected to. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand. What does my solar system have to do with their electrical lines? Mark folded his arms. Maybe nothing. Maybe. Or maybe your installation changed the electrical load in a way that exposed an unauthorized connection. I shook my head. My system is isolated. It should be. The word hung between us. Should be. Mark nodded. Let's get an independent electrician and surveyor. That afternoon we hired both. The surveyor was a woman named Elaine Porter. Elaine was 46, 5'7", athletic with shoulder-length auburn hair, green eyes and a sharp, serious expression. She usually wore a tan field jacket, dark work pants, brown work boots, and a faded beige baseball cap. She arrived in a white Ford Transit van loaded with surveying equipment. She walked the northern boundary with a GPS receiver while Mark and I followed. After almost 2 hours she stopped. You have something here. What? She pointed toward the ground. According to the historical survey, the easement should run right through this section. I looked around. All I saw was grass. Elaine unpacked a ground scanner. For the next 30 minutes, she moved slowly across the pasture. Then the machine beeped. She stopped. That's interesting. What? Metal conduit. My stomach tightened. How deep? About 4 feet. Mark looked at me. That's not on any of the current utility maps. Elaine scanned another section. Beep, then another. Beep. A line was running beneath my property. It went toward the HOA subdivision. What is it carrying? I asked. Elaine shook her head. We'll need an electrical specialist. The next day, an electrical engineer arrived. His name was Robert Hayes. He was 55, broad-shouldered, bald, and wore safety glasses even when he wasn't working. He inspected my solar system first. Everything checked out. Then we followed the underground line. Robert opened an access point near the northern fence. He stared inside. That's not supposed to be here. What is it? An old distribution connection. To what? He traced the cables. Then his expression changed. This is feeding something. Where? He followed the line on the map. Into the subdivision. I felt a chill. Could my solar system be feeding it? Robert shook his head. Not normally. But somebody has installed equipment that appears to allow power to move between systems. Mark stepped forward. Without authorization. Robert looked at him. That's what it looks like. My stomach dropped. Are you saying someone connected my property to the HOA's electrical system? Robert nodded slowly. And if that connection is active? He didn't finish. Say it. You may be powering part of the subdivision without knowing it. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then I laughed, not because it was funny. Because the idea was absurd. The HOA was threatening me for installing solar panels while potentially using my property as an unofficial electrical source. Mark's phone rang. He answered. His face changed almost immediately. What? He listened. Then he looked at me. Victoria filed an emergency complaint with the county. What does she claim? That your solar system is creating an unsafe backfeed. I stared at Robert. Can it? Robert shook his head. Not the way this system is configured. Mark ended the call. What now? Now, he said, we document everything. That evening I received another letter. This one was much more serious. It claimed my solar panels were an imminent electrical hazard. The HOA demanded immediate shutdown. If I refused, they threatened to seek a court order. I called Mark. He told me not to respond yet. Instead, he asked me to do something strange. Check your electricity meter. I walked outside. The meter showed almost no grid consumption. That was normal during the day. But then I noticed something unusual. The meter was running backward. I stared at it. My solar system was exporting power. That wasn't unusual either. What was unusual was the amount. It was far higher than my house could produce. I called Robert. He arrived within an hour. He inspected the system. Then he looked at the meter. Your house isn't using this much. Where is it going? He followed the wiring. Then he found the problem. A hidden switching device had been installed near the main service equipment. It wasn't part of my original installation. I hadn't authorized it, I hadn't paid for it, and I certainly hadn't installed it. Robert photographed everything. Someone has modified your electrical service. Can we remove it? Not yet.
Yeah. Why?
Because this is evidence. Mark nodded. Exactly. That night, I reviewed my security footage. At 20:17 a.m., a white utility truck entered my driveway. 2 men stepped out. They wore dark jackets with no company logos. One of them opened my electrical service box. The other stood watch. They were on my property for 11 minutes. Then they left. I froze the footage. The truck's license plate was visible. I sent it to Mark. He called me immediately. Don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Who are they? I don't know yet. 3 days later, the county sent an inspector. His name was Harold Mason. He was 62, short, heavyset, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He arrived in a county SUV wearing a Navy county utility jacket. He examined my permits, then the solar system, then the electrical service. Finally, he asked, did you install this switching equipment? No. Do you know who did? He looked toward Mark. Your attorney. Wes, Harold sighed. I've seen this before. My heart sank. Where? Old utility districts. He pulled a folder from his vehicle. Inside were electrical maps. He spread them across my hood. Your property was originally part of a private distribution network. Mark studied the map, and this line, Harold pointed. It was supposed to have been decommissioned.
I'm supposed to. Yes.
Was it? Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked me, have you noticed unusual power behavior? I nodded. The meter has been exporting more than it should. Harold looked at me. That's because somebody has been drawing power from your service. I felt my blood run cold. Who? We don't know. Mark pointed at the map. Then why is the HOA claiming Daniel is the problem? Harold looked uncomfortable. Because the HOA submitted documents suggesting that his solar system is interfering with their electrical network. Are those documents accurate? Harold removed his glasses. No. Silence. Then why did you come here? Because someone requested an emergency inspection. Woo, Harold hesitated. Red Creek Energy Services. Mark looked at me. The same company connected to the old easement. Before Harold left, he gave us one warning. Don't disconnect anything yourself. Why? Because if that buried line is still energized, shutting it down incorrectly could damage equipment. Then he paused. And one more thing. What? If I were you, I'd have a surveyor inspect the property records all the way back to the original subdivision plans. We already did. Harold shook his head. Not far enough. He got into his SUV. Look at the original development agreement. Then he drove away. That night, Mark found the document. The original Red Creek Estates development agreement had been filed with the county 14 years earlier. Most of it was routine. Road maintenance, drainage, utilities, property access. But one section made my stomach twist. The developer had created a private energy infrastructure agreement, and the agreement included my property, without my permission, without my signature, without my grandfather's signature. Mark read the paragraph twice. They claimed your land was part of the utility corridor. But it wasn't. No. So how did they get that approved? Mark looked at the signature page. There. I leaned closer. A signature appeared beneath the name of the county official who had supposedly approved the agreement. But the date was wrong. The official hadn't even been in office yet. Mark whispered, this signature may have been forged. I stared at him. So the HOA is trying to force me to remove my solar panels.
Yes.
Because the panels exposed an illegal electrical connection.
Yes.
And that connection exists because someone may have used a fraudulent development agreement to claim rights over my land. Mark closed the folder. That's what it looks like. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Tom Bradley. Daniel, don't trust the OA board. I found something. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't Tom, it was the sheriff's office. A deputy told me Tom had been involved in a traffic accident. My heart dropped.
Is he okay? He's alive.
Where is he? The deputy gave me the hospital name. I grabbed my keys. As I walked toward my truck, I noticed something across the road. A black SUV was parked in the darkness. The same vehicle I'd seen before. Its headlights turned on. Then it drove away. I got into my truck and followed. But the SUV disappeared at the next intersection. When I reached the hospital, Tom was sitting upright in a bed with a bandage over his forehead. He looked shaken. What happened? He stared at me. Someone forced me off the road. Did you see them? No. What did you find? Tom reached under his pillow and pulled out a folded document. I found this in the HOA records. He handed it to me. It was a payment ledger. Several large payments had been made to Red Creek Energy Services. But the payments weren't for electricity. They were labeled lead-assistance. I looked at the dates. They started almost exactly when Red Creek Estates began construction. Then I saw the final entry. A payment made just 3 weeks before my solar system was installed. The recipient wasn't Red Creek Energy Services. It was a private company I'd never heard of. Mark had warned me not to make assumptions. But now I knew one thing. Someone had been preparing for my solar installation long before I ever put the first panel on my roof. And if the HOA succeeded in forcing me to remove them, whatever was hidden beneath my property would stay hidden. I folded the ledger. Tom, who else knows about this? He shook his head. I don't know. Then his expression changed. Daniel, they knew I had the document. Wait, my phone rang. It was Mark. I answered. His voice was unusually tense. Daniel, get home. Why? Your house is surrounded by deputies. What? There's an emergency court order. For what? They're claiming your solar system is an immediate threat to public safety. I looked at Tom. He looked terrified. I ran out of the hospital. By the time I reached my property, 3 sheriff's vehicles were parked across my driveway. Victoria Hale stood beside them. She was holding a court document. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, she wasn't smiling. She looked frightened. I stepped out of my truck. What did you do? Victoria stared at me. You need to shut the system down. Why? She glanced toward my roof, then toward the pasture, and finally toward the buried utility corridor. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because the power company is coming tomorrow. I frowned. What does that have to do with me? She looked directly into my eyes. Everything. Then one of the deputies walked toward me carrying a sealed envelope. Mr.
Carter. Les?
You've been ordered to appear in county court tomorrow morning. I opened the envelope. Inside was the emergency petition. The HOA was asking the judge to seize control of my electrical system. But there was something else attached, a map. My property was highlighted in red, so was the underground utility corridor. And beneath the map, someone had written 3 words in black ink, "Do you know disconnectee?" I looked at Mark. He had just arrived. He read the note. Then his face went completely still. "Daniel." "What?" He pointed toward the northern pasture. "Those aren't power lines." I stared at him. "Then what are they?" He looked toward the courthouse papers. "I think we're about to find out." The next morning, I stood outside the county courthouse with Mark Reynolds while the Texas sun climbed over the parking lot. I had barely slept. The court order was still folded inside my jacket. The words "do not disconnect" kept running through my mind. Mark looked at me. "Whatever happens in there, let me do the talking." I nodded. "What's your strategy?" "Prove 3 things. He held up his fingers. "First, your solar system is legal. Second, the HOA has no authority over your electrical equipment. Third, somebody altered your property records and electrical service without your permission." And the hidden line. That may be the thing that brings all of this down. We walked inside. Victoria Hale was already there with 3 HOA board members and an attorney. The board members were Thomas Whittaker, a 60-year-old retired banker with silver hair, Melissa Grant, 48, a sharp-faced real estate broker, and Carl Benson, 55, a construction contractor with a thick mustache. They sat behind Victoria. Nobody looked at me, except Victoria. Her eyes followed me all the way to my seat. Then the judge entered. Judge Eleanor Whitmore was 63, composed, gray-haired, and known around the county for being extremely patient until someone wasted her time. The HOA attorney stood first. "Your Honor, the association is requesting an emergency order requiring Mr. Carter to shut down an unsafe solar installation." A Mark immediately stood. "Your Honor, the installation was permitted, inspected, and approved by the county." The judge looked at the HOA attorney. "Then why are we here?" The attorney handed her a folder. "Because new evidence indicates Mr. Carter's system is backfeeding a private electrical network." Mark stood again. "That network was illegally connected to my client's property." The judge looked between them. "Do we have evidence?" Mark nodded. "We do." He placed photographs on the evidence table. The hidden switching device, the underground conduit, the unauthorized electrical connection, the security footage showing 2 unidentified men accessing my electrical service at 2017 in the morning. Then he produced my original county permit. Mr. Carter did not install this unauthorized equipment. The OA attorney objected. Speculation. The Mark smiled. "We have an independent electrical engineer prepared to testify." Robert Hayes took the stand. He explained the system in simple terms. My solar panels were legal. My battery system was legal. My electrical configuration was legal. But the hidden switching equipment wasn't part of the original installation. The judge leaned forward. "Could this equipment cause a dangerous backfeed?" Robert answered carefully. "Under certain circumstances, yes." The OA attorney immediately looked confident. "But it could also allow power to flow into another network,
Wes!
which could endanger the public if improperly configured." Victoria's attorney sat down. Mark stood. "Mr. Hayes, did Mr. Carter install that equipment?" "No." "Did his solar contractor install it?" "No." "Was it present during the county inspection?" "No." Mark looked at the judge. "And who benefits from this connection?" The COA attorney jumped up. "Objection." The judge raised her hand. "Sustained." A Mark nodded. He wasn't finished. He called Elaine Porter, the surveyor. She displayed the historical maps. Then she showed the underground utility corridor. The line crossed my land. It continued beneath the OA's roads, and according to the old records, it had been abandoned decades earlier. Judge Whitmore looked at the map. "Who owns this line?" Elaine shook her head. "That's unclear." "Why?" "Because the original utility corporation was dissolved." The judge frowned. "Then who is maintaining it?" Nobody answered. Mark said, "That's exactly what we are trying to determine." Then he produced the original development agreement. The courtroom became quiet. He showed the judge the disputed signature. "This document claims my client's property was included in a utility corridor." The judge studied it. "Was it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because the property deed predates the agreement." Mark placed the deed beside it. The judge compared the dates. Then she looked at the OA attorney. "Who signed this development agreement?" The attorney hesitated. "The county records indicate it was approved by a county official." "Which official?" He gave the name. The judge looked at the county representative sitting behind the courtroom. "Was that official in office on this date?" The representative checked his files. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at the document again. "Then we have a problem." Victoria shifted in her seat. Mark turned toward me. I could tell he knew something had changed. The judge ordered a recess. During the break, Victoria approached me. For the first time, she looked less like an HOA president and more like someone who was afraid. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." I stared at her. "Then explain it." She glanced toward her attorney. "I can't." "You can." She lowered her voice. "The line isn't just carrying electricity." My heart stopped. "What is it carrying?" She shook her head. "Not here." "Then where?" She walked away. I followed her into the hallway. "Victoria." She stopped. Then she turned around. "Your grandfather knew." I froze. "Knew what?" "That the corridor was never supposed to be abandoned." My mouth went dry. "My grandfather died 12 years ago?" "I know." "What did he know?" She looked at me. "He refused to sign something." "What?" "I don't know." Then why say he knew? Because I found his name in the original files. Before I could ask another question, her attorney pulled her away. The hearing resumed. This time, the county official requested permission to speak. Judge Whitmore allowed it. He explained that the county had discovered inconsistencies in the historical utility records. Then he said something that changed everything. Your Honor, there may be a second infrastructure system beneath Red Creek Estates. The judge stared at him. Second system.
Yes, what kind?
We don't know yet. A mark stood. Could it explain the unexplained electrical draw from Mixtard, Carter's property?
Yes.
The judge asked, who has access to it? The county official looked toward Victoria. That is unclear. Then the courthouse doors opened. A uniformed sheriff's deputy entered and whispered something to Judge Whitmore. Her expression changed. She asked him to repeat it. He leaned closer. The judge looked at the county officials. Is this confirmed?
Wes.
What happened? The deputy spoke quietly. A transformer failed in Red Creek Estates. The HOA attorney stood. Your Honor! Judge Whitmore raised her hand. Continue. The subdivision is losing power. A few people in the courtroom began whispering. Then the deputy added, except one property. My heart began pounding. Judge Whitmore looked at me. Mr. Carter. I stood. Yes, Your Honor. Is your home currently powered? Wes, how? My solar system. The courtroom went silent. Victoria closed her eyes. The judge looked at her. Ems Hale. Victoria didn't respond. The deputy continued. Your Honor, the HOA's emergency generator isn't functioning. Why full system failure? And Mr. Carter's property, fully operational. Mark leaned toward me. This is the moment. What moment? They can't pretend your solar system is the problem anymore. The judge ordered an immediate technical inspection. By late afternoon, county engineers had arrived at my property. The buried line was traced, the unauthorized connection was documented, and then they discovered something far more disturbing. The hidden electrical network wasn't simply connected to my property. It was connected to the HOA's emergency infrastructure. Someone had effectively used my land as a private electrical corridor, without permission, without a recorded easement, and without my knowledge. But there was still one question. Who had done it? The answer came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley. He had recovered enough from his accident to give a statement. He told investigators that months earlier, he had seen Victoria meeting with a man outside the office. The man wasn't an HOA employee. He worked for Red Creek Energy Services. Tom had overheard them discussing the Carter property. He also remembered one phrase. Once the solar system goes online, we can prove the connection. That sentence changed the entire case. The HOA hadn't been trying to stop my solar panels. They had been waiting for them. My solar system had exposed an electrical connection that previously stayed hidden because the grid's normal flow masked it. Once my panels started producing power, the abnormal current became visible. That was why they suddenly panicked. That was why they wanted the panels removed. And that was why someone had tried to access my electrical equipment at night. But the biggest revelation came 2 days later. The county ordered a complete survey of the underground corridor. Workers dug near the northern boundary. They found the conduit. Then they found something else. A second line. It wasn't electrical. It was an old communications conduit. Inside were damaged cables and a sealed metal junction box. The box contained decades-old utility records. Among them was a handwritten maintenance log. The final entry was dated 1991. It was signed by my grandfather. I stared at his handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The entry said, "System remains active. Access denied until land agreement is corrected." My hands started shaking. My grandfather had known. He had refused access, and he'd documented it. But the final page was even more important. It listed the original landowner agreement. It stated clearly that no private utility company had permission to use the property without the owner's written consent. My grandfather had never given that consent. Neither had I. The HOA's entire claim depended on a document that appeared to have been falsified. The county referred the matter to investigators. The sheriff opened a criminal investigation into the unauthorized electrical modifications, trespass, and possible document fraud. Red Creek Energy Services denied everything, until investigators found their contractor's truck on my security footage. Then the story changed. The contractor admitted he had been ordered to install the switching equipment. He claimed he was told the HOA had legal authority. Who gave you the order? Investigators asked. He gave them a name. The same name appeared on several financial records. A development consultant who had worked with Red Creek Estates during its original construction. Investigators eventually discovered payments from the utility company to a consulting firm connected to members of the original development team. The money had been moving for years. The hidden infrastructure wasn't some accident. It was a business arrangement, and my property had been the missing piece. The HOA had been using my land to support an electrical system they didn't legally control. Then they made one fatal mistake. They tried to force me to remove the solar panels. That brought the entire hidden system into the light. 3 months later, the case returned to court. This time, I wasn't the defendant. The HOA was. The county presented evidence showing the disputed development agreement contained a fraudulent signature. The unauthorized electrical equipment was traced to contractors hired through Red Creek Energy Services. The survey confirmed that my property had never been legally included in the utility corridor, and the security footage showed unauthorized people entering my property. The judge ruled in my favor. The HOA was prohibited from interfering with my solar system. The disputed easement was declared unenforceable. The unauthorized equipment was ordered removed. The county required the utility company to repair every section of infrastructure affected by the illegal connection, and the HOA was ordered to reimburse a substantial portion of my legal expenses. But the most satisfying part came afterward. Several board members followed. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring. The county established new oversight requirements for private utility systems, and Red Creek Energy Services lost its contract. As for me, I kept my solar panels. They weren't illegal. They weren't dangerous. They weren't destroying the neighborhood. They were the reason the truth was discovered. Months later, another major storm hit Texas. The grid failed again. This time, the outage lasted almost 14 hours. Across Red Creek Estates, houses went dark. Porch lights disappeared. Security systems shut down. Garage doors stopped working. Generators roared to life wherever people had them. But my house stayed bright. The battery system kicked in automatically. The refrigerator kept running. The well pump worked. The barn lights came on. My cattle had water. And for the first time, nobody complained about my solar panels. In fact, people started knocking on my door. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to asked questions about solar. Tom brought coffee. Elaine stopped by to check on the new survey markers. Even the new HOA president came to my porch. He wasn't anything like Victoria. He was a quiet older man named Samuel Ortiz. He stood there awkwardly for a few seconds. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I smiled. "You weren't the one who did it." "No." He looked at the solar panels, but I benefited from it. I understood what he meant. For years, everyone had accepted the HOA's authority without questioning where that authority ended. They had trusted documents, rules, letters, threats, until someone finally asked one simple question. Who gave you the right? That question had cost me months of stress, thousands of dollars, and more sleepless nights than I could count. But it had also saved my property. One evening, I stood on my porch watching the sunset over the pasture. The solar panels reflected the last orange light of the day. The red barn sat quietly beyond the fence. Cattle moved slowly through the grass. Everything was peaceful. I thought about my grandfather. He had written one sentence in an old maintenance log decades earlier. Access denied until land agreement is corrected. He had refused to surrender something that belonged to him. I had simply finished what he started. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. Court order finalized. Case closed. I looked at the message and smiled. Then I looked back at the roof. The HOA had called my solar panels illegal. They had tried to intimidate me. They had tried to bury the evidence. They had even tried to make me look like the threat. But in the end, those 12 panels didn't destroy their system. They exposed it. And the next time someone told me I couldn't power my own home, I already knew the answer. I looked at the glowing house behind me and said quietly, they were never afraid of my solar panels. They were afraid of what they would reveal.